Hogwarts, Treasure Hunting with the Eye of God. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 31. Too many scammers, not enough report letters. Under Ting's guidance, his three roommates finally succeeded in making some changes to the matchsticks before the get out of class ended. Anthony barely changed the shape of the matchstick. Terry Boot successfully turned part of the matchstick into iron. As for Michael Corner, he made the fuse of the match disappear, and then he couldn't make it change at all. However, they were all quite satisfied with the results. It's better to have some changes than nothing. In fact, until the end of the class, most of the little wizards couldn't make any changes to the matchsticks. Professor McGonagall was not disappointed by this. She never thought that the little wizards would learn it completely in one class. After assigning a 6-foot-long paper on the theory of transfiguration as homework, she announced the end of the get out of class. After leaving the transfiguration classroom, Ting couldn't wait to go to the library. The Library of Hogwarts is located on the second floor of the castle. The rich collection of magic books here is the best in Europe and can be called a treasure of the magic world. From light-hearted leisure readings to unfathomable forbidden magic, it can be said that there is everything. The first time Ting came to the library, he was deeply shocked by the vast sea of books in front of him. There are hundreds of bookshelves in the library, nearly 100 narrow passages, and each bookshelf has thousands of magic books. It is 10 times more spectacular than the Ravenclaw common room. Here, you can find all the magic you want to learn. For Ting, who has the wisdom of the Rose Witch, this is almost heaven. He even thinks that in addition to potential collections, this library is the most valuable place in Hogwarts. The little wizard who does not come to the library is destined to spend a relatively unsuccessful 7 years. The moment he stepped into the library, a solemn and quiet atmosphere came to his face, making Ting unconsciously lighten his steps and lower his voice, for fear of breaking the tranquility. It is definitely not because a librarian is staring at him. Mrs. Pants, the librarian, was thin and had a slightly bad temper. She held a feather duster in her hand and looked serious, like a vulture ready to pounce on food at any time, guarding this pure land of knowledge. After observation, Ting found that the feather duster in the other party's hand was not just an ordinary cleaning tool, but it was actually attached with a variety of spells. Which could not only easily brush away dust, but also eliminate graffiti on books, and it could also have a deterrent effect on those restless magic books. Ting saw with his own eyes that Mrs. Pants just waved the feather duster casually, and a monster book of monsters that wanted to make trouble immediately stopped, lying on the ground obediently, allowing Mrs. Pants to tie it up with ropes and put it in this or that posture. Hogwarts, a castle that has been passed down for thousands of years, is indeed worthy of its reputation, and there are treasures everywhere. Even the most inconspicuous items may contain amazing magical power. The key is whether you have a pair of eyes that can discover these beauties. Ting's Hogwarts collection list +1. Very good, this will be my home from now on. Ting lingered here for more than 2 hours, and got a general understanding of what books there were. Finally, he chose an introduction to charms analysis and walked towards the study area. There were neatly arranged tables, and many figures were already sitting there studying hard. Looking around, most of them were Ravenclaw's eagles. After all, Ravenclaw is a college named after wisdom, and excellent grades can best demonstrate their talents. Although the standard of measuring wisdom may be slightly one-sided, it is undeniable that the students of the Eagle Academy have already formed a trend of involution, and the library has become their second classroom. In sharp contrast, are the little badgers of Hufflepuff. They prefer to stay away from the busyness of the library, taste the fragrance of afternoon tea in the warm common room, enjoy the snacks made by the house elves, and choose a life of lying down and letting things go. Gryffindor students rarely set foot in the library. They were busy adventuring around the castle, and many of them had already set their sights on the abandoned corridor on the 4th floor. As for Slytherin students, they were more willing to build their own network of contacts than to study. After all, for many of them, if they failed in their studies, they would have to go home and inherit the manor and family business. Then, won't you, the test takers, have to work for them obediently? Ting quickly found Hermione and Susan in the corner. Perhaps because they had communicated with each other at the beginning of the school year, the two of them were acquaintances. Now they were studying at the same table. Hermione frowned slightly, obviously thinking about a complex problem. Susan bit her quill and wrote attentively, looking diligent. Ting was very surprised that Susan was here. Based on his first impression of Susan, this child was not a top-notch girl who was keen on academics, nor was she a particularly strong-willed girl. Why would she be in the library on the first day of school? Driven by curiosity, Ting decided to go forward and take a look. Susan was writing today's transfiguration homework. As soon as he approached, the little girl hurriedly covered her parchment, her little face blushed. Don't look at this. But Ting's memory was so good that he just took a quick glance and remembered the scene before the homework was blocked. Well, Ting finally understood why Susan did this. This article she wrote is not so much a paper as a flattery to Ting. The whole article is full of Ting guided me to complete this spell, Ting told me how to proceed, Ting's analysis made me suddenly enlightened, and a lot of disgusting flattery to Ting. No wonder Susan is so shy and dare not show it to him. Ting did not intend to embarrass his little fangirl, so he turned his eyes to Hermione. Who knew that Hermione's reaction was exactly the same as Susan's, and she also covered the homework in a panic. Go away, Ting, you are not allowed to look. Hermione's attitude is much tougher than Susan. Hey, the little girl is quite fierce. For such a diehard, Ting will use a heavy punch. He recalled the fragment he had just seen hastily and recited in a low voice, Dear Professor Dumbledore, hello. I am an ordinary freshman of Gryffindor College. I have some things to report to you. Hermione was immediately panicked and threw herself on the table, pressing her chin tightly on the parchment, and shouted anxiously, Don't read it. You are not allowed to read it. Ting sat on the chair, and a hint of teasing flashed across his face. Hermione, are you writing a letter to the principal to complain about Professor Binns? As soon as this was said, even Susan next to him couldn't help but come over. Hermione's eyes flashed, her cheeks flushed, and she snorted, What's wrong? Is it not possible? I am also thinking about everyone's learning. In such a history of magic class, can we learn anything substantial? If you have to write a letter for this, then you may have to write a lot of letters. Ting pointed out, with a smile. Why? Hermione looked up and looked at him in confusion, frowning slightly. You mean, Professor Dumbledore won't pay attention to 1 or 2 letters of complaint? No, I mean. Ting sighed, you will have many professors to complain about in the future. At least half of the teaching staff at Hogwarts are unqualified. Can't you stand Professor Binns? Seeing the 2 little witches looking at each other in disbelief, Ting just shook his head and said nothing more. Professor Quirrell, the villain, is needless to say. Miss Hooch in the flying class can't even use a levitation spell. Once a little wizard gets into trouble, she can't do anything except send him to the school infirmary. Professor Trelawney in the divination class is an old liar most of the time, and only occasionally when her talent is stimulated will she be right once or twice. Hagrid, the future professor of the magical creature protection class, always likes to teach some dangerous animals, which seriously threatens the safety of the little wizards. Naive girls, you will understand in the future. Episode 32, The Paradise Typewriter and Dating Tips. Ting took out the parchment and began to concentrate on completing his homework. Although the homework at Hogwarts sounds high-end, and students are required to write several foot-long papers at any time, what is the reality? The professors are not strict about these papers. To put it bluntly, they just ask students to write book reviews and the like. Come to think of it, you can't really ask a group of 11-year-old wizards to write advanced papers. Their basic education level is not as good as that of Muggle children of the same age. This kind of pediatric task is a piece of cake for Ting, who has actually written a graduation thesis. He finished an article in a few minutes. It's a pity that there is no ChatGPT in this era, otherwise he can save even this little effort. After completing the homework, Ting took out a single book borrowed from the library, and took out an automatic feather pen to start copying. Originally, Ting also considered using copy in pairs on the books in the library, so that he could get copies in batches quickly, conveniently, and economically. But this idea was quickly overturned. How could those who made books not think of this simple copying method? Therefore, most books will be cast with the anti-copying spell during the binding process to avoid this kind of thing. Therefore, if Ting wants a book, his only choice is to copy it. But as he copied, Ting became impatient. The principle of the automatic feather pen is to automatically record text according to the user's thoughts. In other words, if Ting wants to copy the book, it is equivalent to silently reading the book in his mind. But with Ting's talent, silently reading the book is basically the same as memorizing it, so why copy it specially? What's more, this efficiency is too low. Even if Ting reads 10 lines at a glance and reads fast, he can only copy 1 or 2 books in one night. And the number of books in the library is counted in thousands. With this efficiency, it will take Ting forever to read the library. These automatic feather pens are almost bought in vain. Afterwards, Ting planned to throw away these quills. But then he thought, why not make use of them? It just so happened that Ting had a new idea about the system recently. So, after leaving the library, Ting piled up a dozen automatic quills together, and after thinking about it, he piled up all the ink and ordinary quills he bought. Since he wanted to make use of them, he might as well give it a try and take a big gamble. Will bulk collection produce different effects? Collect. Ting stretched out his hands. With a flash of light, the pile of quills and ink in front of him disappeared. The system's rewards followed. It was a black, simple-looking typewriter with a pair of pink wings floating next to it. This is the Paradise Magic typewriter. Ting recognized it at a glance. It was a prop from the Paradise of the Past in a certain Bing Bing Bang. In the game, the magic typewriter is actually the embodiment of the Paradise of the Past's log system, which automatically records everything that happened in the Paradise of the Past. In reality, its function is to record everything that happens in a designated space. This ability does not seem to be as omnipotent as in the game. But Ting noticed another way to use it. What if I use it to record the contents of the books in the library? After all, the contents of the books are also part of the space of the library. Unfortunately, the library is closed now, so he had to go back to the dormitory to try. When he returned to the dormitory, the 3 roommates had already fallen asleep. Ting ignored them, but turned on the typewriter and made a request. Typewriter, help me record the contents of all the books in this dormitory. Got it, cute human, the typewriter made a pink fairy voice, I'll help you record it right away. Next, Ting watched with his own eyes, the contents of the first-year Transfiguration textbook appeared on the typewriter paper line by line, and the printing speed was so fast that it was even comparable to the Muggle photocopies. It's just that the noise of the clacking was a bit uncomfortable. Ting had already heard Michael turn over and was almost woken up. Drowsy, sleep peacefully. Ting's reaction was so fast that he immediately cast a hypnotic spell to put Michael back to sleep. Then, he cast a hypnotic spell on Anthony and Terry. Then he realized the problem. In this case, I should have silenced the typewriter, right? He slapped his thigh. He was careless, or his reflexes were too fast, and his body made a choice before his brain. It can be seen what position the 3 roommates held in his subconscious. I'm sorry, everyone, you should sleep a little longer. Ting touched his nose, and then cast silent on the typewriter. The crisp typing sound disappeared immediately. Within 5 minutes, Ting picked up the typewriter and found that he had already printed out a whole book of Beginner's Transfiguration Guide, and now he had started to print standard spells. That's it. Ting stopped the typewriter. The experiment was over, and he had already understood what he should understand, and typing further would only waste paper and ink. 5 minutes for 1 book, an hour for 12 books, if I stay in the library for 1 night, I can type at least 40 books. Ting calculated, if I hide the typewriter and put it in the library, and let it type automatically, it is not impossible for it to type all day long. Even if I don't take such extreme measures, it is not impossible to copy all the books in the library within 7 years, with the time every night. Thinking of this, Ting was finally satisfied and could sleep peacefully. The next morning, when Ting arrived at the auditorium, he saw his roommate Michael Connor waving at him mysteriously. Hey! Come here. Ting walked over and saw his 3 roommates gathered together, all sleepy, and asked knowingly, what's wrong, why haven't you woken up yet? I don't know. Michael yawned, I slept too deeply last night, I almost couldn't get up this morning, and I'm still a little sleepy now. Anthony also sighed, I don't know why, I feel that my sleep has never been so good. Then you have to thank me. Ting smiled secretly in his heart. Okay, let's talk about business. Terry Boot reminded. Yes, business. Anthony slapped his thigh and showed a gossipy expression. Ting, tell me the truth, did you go on a date last night? With Miss Granger, from Gryffindor. Michael said. We fell asleep and you didn't even come back to the dormitory. Terry Boot added. Ting was very upset. What on earth were these little wizards thinking? He was only 11 years old, and his hair hadn't even started to grow. Some girls at this age hadn't even developed yet, so how could they fall in love? But then again, think about those elementary school students who fell in love early in their previous lives. At the age of 11, they were at least quite mature in their thinking. Although it might be a little early in terms of law and physiology, it was not completely impossible. Yeah, what's wrong? Ting spread his hands and admitted it openly. Choosing between spending a night in the library and dating, he decisively chose the latter. After all, this would make Ting look more respectable. Terry Boot was full of admiration. It's amazing, it's just the beginning of the school year. Anthony also came up eagerly. Ting, you have to teach us a few tricks. Actually, it's not difficult to date a girl. Ting smiled slightly, looking confident. The key is to master the skills and know how to please her, so that it can be done easily. Then can you show us a live demonstration? Michael suggested. This kind of thing. Ting looked disdainful, and then turned to look at Susan, who was talking to Hannah at the Hufflepuff table next door. Susan, do you want to go to the library together tonight? Hermione and I will go. Okay. Susan turned her head and showed a bright smile on her face. Ting raised his eyebrows at the three roommates. Do you understand? This is the technique. The three shook their heads. They were all dumbfounded. It was obvious that Ting dated Hermione yesterday. Why did he change someone today? And it was 1-2. You have to take the initiative and be bold in this matter. Ting said with the tone of an experienced person. For things like this between men and women, someone has to speak first. As long as you bravely take the first step, you may get unexpected surprises. Terry looked embarrassed, but what if you are rejected? Michael and Anthony also nodded in agreement. Just thinking about this kind of thing made them feel ashamed. Rejected? Ting looked at the three people as if they were looking at maggots. That means you are not handsome enough. Anyway, I have never been rejected. Hearing this, the three people made contemptuous gestures to Ting. This morning, the little wizards of Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff were very excited because they were about to have the long-awaited defense against the dark arts class. When Ting stepped into the defense against the dark arts classroom, he almost suspected that he had gone to the wrong place. Rather than saying that this is a classroom, it is better to say that it is a haunted house. The windows are blocked by thick curtains, and the dim firelight sways on the walls, as if ghosts or monsters will jump out of the dark at any time. What is even more unbearable is that as soon as you step into the room, a pungent smell of garlic hits you in the face. Due to the long absence of sunlight, the humidity here seems to be able to erode people's bones. The humid air makes this strange smell even stronger, which is simply suffocating. Susan was already sitting in the classroom before them. She is different now. It seems that because of Ting's encouragement, Susan has changed her original personality and become more active, no longer playing badly with other badgers. Now she comes to class early for every class and actively sits in the first row. Since Ravenclaw often attends classes with Hufflepuff, she never forgets to save a seat for Ting. Seeing Susan waving, Ting and his roommates walked over and sat down next to her. As soon as Michael sat down, he covered his nose and complained, "What kind of hell is this place? Why don't you open the window to get some fresh air? It's really stinking." Susan turned her head to look at the window and explained helplessly, "These windows are nailed tightly with wooden boards, and the curtains are so tight that they can't be opened at all." Ting, however, sat calmly in his seat as if nothing had happened, took out a book Introduction to Charms Analysis from his school bag, and began to read it with relish. He knew Quirrell's background well, and he could not learn anything useful in the defense against the dark arts class this year. Or, in the next 7 years, if anyone could learn anything real in this class, that would be hell. So, he would rather spend his time on things that interest him. But other young wizards were not as calm as him. Justin from Hufflepuff was impatient, and in a fit of rage, he picked up a stool and was about to smash the wooden board on the window. Don't do it. Don't open the window." Professor Quirrell rushed into the classroom in a hurry and stopped Justin, who was about to attack in time. With his appearance, the smell of garlic in the classroom became stronger, as if hundreds of people who had eaten garlic were breathing at the same time, which was unbearable. "Professor, what are you talking about?" Megan Jones asked loudly, "Can you speak English?" Professor Quirrell blushed and tried to make his pronunciation clearer. I speak English, authentic London accent." Unfortunately, his words were still stumbling, with a strong accent and a hint of curry, making people mistakenly think that he had just come from India. Seeing that Justin was still unwilling to give up, he waved his arms and gestured anxiously. I was hurt by a vampire, and now I can't blow the wind, and I can't see the light." Hearing this, Justin was so scared that he hurriedly dropped his stool and hid in the last row, fearing that Quirrell would suddenly turn into a vampire and pounce on him. Professor Quirrell saw this and hurriedly waved his hands to explain, "No. It's okay, don't panic. I did special treatment on the wound, I won't become a vampire, don't worry. The female vampire didn't bite me." He began to stammer and recount his thrilling encounter with the vampire in Romania. Episode 33, The Scammer Chilo. It was September, and the weather was still hot enough to make people breathless. In addition, being in a fully enclosed classroom was like being in a sauna, and everyone felt stuffy and unbearable. Professor Quirrell was soon sweating profusely, but he always wrapped himself tightly in the thick scarf. Roger Malone couldn't help but ask curiously, "Professor, it's so hot today, why are you still wearing a scarf? Aren't you afraid of getting prickly heat?" Professor Quirrell wiped the sweat from his forehead and said mysteriously, "This scarf can't be taken off. It is a precious gift given to me by an African prince. It helped me get rid of the entanglement of the resurrected zombies." However, Susan noticed the printed words on the scarf, Fabrique_in_France, made in France. Well, France is a big African country, so you can say it's from Africa. Padma Patil couldn't hide her curiosity and interrupted, "Professor, how did you defeat the resurrected zombies? Can you tell us about it?" Professor Quirrell hesitated and tried to change the subject. "Well, the weather in England is as unbearable as ever. I prefer winter, when, at least it won't be so hot." "Professor Quirrell, are you lying?" Lisa Dupin pointed out mercilessly. Professor Quirrell's cheeks flushed slightly, and he hurriedly defended himself. "I just a little, can't remember clearly. How can this be? Can it be considered a lie? Can the professor's words be false?" Then he spoke a series of difficult Indian accents, such as oblivion and infery, which made the whole class laugh. The classroom was filled with a happy atmosphere. After finally dealing with these difficult little wizards, Professor Quirrell finally started his course. However, his teaching method was really shocking. He just mechanically read aloud from the Defense Against the Dark Arts textbook. The young wizards were shocked to find that the so-called Defense Against the Dark Arts class had turned into a reading class. "I can teach this level of class." When a brave young wizard asked Professor Quirrell to demonstrate the spell himself, he raised his right hand, looking pitiful, saying that he had injured his arm to fight the dragon and could not cast the spell. This obvious excuse was like an insult to everyone's IQ. For a while, the contemptuous eyes in the classroom shot at Quirrell like a sword. Everyone felt that if such a person could be a professor, there must be someone behind him. Later, Quirrell simply didn't want to read the book and asked the students to recite it themselves. He also set a scope and threatened to memorize the spell in the next class. "Professor Quirrell is so useless," Susan complained indignantly after class. "I feel like I didn't learn anything." Anthony revealed mysteriously, "I heard from seniors that Professor Snape has always wanted to apply to teach the Defense Against the Dark Arts class, but the principal won't let him." "Humph, the principal is really an old fool." Michael echoed indignantly, "Instead of letting a loser like Quirrell waste our youth, it's better to let Snape, the gloomy old bat, teach. At least he gives people the impression of being a smart and capable wizard." Hearing this, everyone agreed. But Ting believes that they will not think so on Friday. The second class today is the Charms class, and the Little Eagles will take it with the Gryffindors. But when they arrived at the Charms classroom, no Gryffindors were there. Until 5 minutes before class, the classroom door was suddenly pushed open, and a large group of Gryffindor wizards filed in. The wizard robes they wore were covered in dust, their faces were covered in dust stains, and they exuded an indescribable odor, very much like a dung ball. Ting grabbed Hermione and asked curiously, "Did you have a fight with Slytherin?" The scene in front of him forced him to guess so. The young wizards in the entire Lion Courtyard were in a mess, obviously experiencing an extraordinary event. "Oh, don't mention it." Hermione waved her hands irritably. "We just finished a herbology class, and we were fertilizing the herbs throughout the class. As a result, Seamus blew up the bucket of fertilizer." Ting? He could understand the previous words, but Seamus's operation of blowing up the fertilizer bucket was really incredible to him. He had always thought that herbs in the magical world were made from byproducts of magical creatures such as dragon manure. Could it be that they would also import ammonium nitrate from Muggles? He looked around and couldn't help asking, "Where's Neville? Why didn't he come?" "He's in the school infirmary," Hermione explained. Ting was speechless. A herbology class could cause such a big commotion. Not only did the fertilizer bucket explode, but a little wizard was also sent to the school infirmary, and the others were also in a mess. These little wizards from Gryffindor are really talents. "Hey, Hermione, the herbology class at Hogwarts. Are those herbs the same as the herbs we usually understand?" Ting continued to ask tentatively. Hermione sighed softly, "Although it's not quite the same as what I've seen before, it should be the kind of herbs you imagine." "Oh, then I'm relieved." Ting breathed a sigh of relief. However, Hermione's mood at this time was quite complicated. She already regretted that she didn't go to Ravenclaw with Ting when they were sorted, but insisted on staying in Gryffindor, which he thought was the best. Otherwise, she wouldn't have to suffer this. The bell for the spells class rang soon. Professor Flitwick stood on a high stool to make sure that he could be seen by every little wizard in the classroom. He looked around and showed a helpless expression. Originally, our spells class should start with the most basic spells, but seeing your current state. Professor Flitwick shook his head. I decided to teach you some more practical spells so that you can use them immediately. The state of the little wizards at this moment is indeed terrible. Needless to say, the little wizards in Gryffindor are all covered in dust, and the little wizards in Ravenclaw are filled with an indescribable smell of garlic. If he doesn't take action, he might faint first. Okay, Professor Flitwick cleared his throat. Can anyone tell me what the spell for the cleansing spell is? And what does it do? Hermione raised her arms high and turned to look at Ting provocatively. Just now, she had made up her mind. Since she couldn't transfer to another house, she would change the house. She planned to turn her grief and anger into strength, starting with herself, to make Gryffindor what she wanted it to be. And now, let's start by adding points to the house. Ting blinked and didn't argue with her. He did want to leave a good impression on the professors, but he had a more advanced method. Very good, Miss Granger. Professor Flitwick smiled and pointed out Hermione's name. Hermione stood up quickly and said in a clear voice, the spell of the cleansing spell is cleansing up. Its purpose is to sweep away those things that we think are garbage according to our wishes. Very good, 1 point for Gryffindor. Professor Flitwick seemed very interested and continued, Miss Granger explained it very well. The cleansing spell can remove the debris in our eyes. As long as you can use it skillfully, the annoying stains and smells on your body will disappear without a trace. Like this, the professor said while demonstrating, cleansing up. A breeze suddenly surged around Parvati Patil, who was sitting in the front row, as if an invisible whirlwind surrounded her. After the wind stopped, Parvati looked brand new, all the dirt on her body disappeared, her wizard robes were brand new, and even the indescribable smell before disappeared. Parvati was full of surprise, and the other little wizards of Gryffindor looked at Professor Flitwick with expectant eyes, hoping that Professor Flitwick could do the same to them. Obviously, Professor Flitwick didn't intend to do this. He warned earnestly, the cleaning spell is indeed magical, but it also contains considerable risks. If your definition of garbage is not clear enough, this spell may not only fail to work, but may even bring unexpected troubles. He looked around to make sure that every student was listening carefully, especially when you are cleaning your own dirt, you must be very clear about what you want to remove. Remember, when casting the spell, the target must be clear and accurate. Episode 34, The Top Student and the Top Student. In order to deepen the student's understanding, Professor Flitwick gave another example of a spell that went out of control. A witch tried to use the cleansing spell to remove the hair on her legs, but the power of the spell was too strong and swept away all the hair on her body, including her hair. After hearing this example, all the young wizards, both men and women, were horrified, and some of them also gave up some bold ideas. There was no way, not only witches love beauty, but British wizards are also often troubled by baldness. After talking about the example of failed spells, Professor Flitwick patiently and carefully explained the key points of the cleansing spell. Okay, that's it for the theoretical explanation. Professor Flitwick announced, next, we will enter the practical part. Oh. No, no, no. Mr. Weasley, put down your wand. The professor suddenly shouted. Ting turned his head and looked. Ron pointed his wand at Harry and kept urging Harry to take out his wand. Obviously, he couldn't wait to get rid of those annoying traces of fertilizer on his body. Listen, everyone, Professor Flitwick said with an extremely serious look, until you can master the cleansing spell, you must not use this magic on people, understand? As soon as he finished speaking, Professor Flitwick waved his wand. A box flew out of the desk, flew between each little wizard, and then sprinkled a small pile of sand in front of each person's desk. Now, your goal is to use the cleansing spell to remove the sand. Start, children. Professor Flitwick announced. Clean up. Clean up. The sound of spells rang out in the classroom. Ting looked around, and no one had successfully cast the spell yet. Clean up. Hermione chanted the spell softly, and with a slight wave of her wand, the sand on the table disappeared instantly. Great, Miss Granger. Professor Flitwick said happily, Gryffindor gets 2 points for this. Hermione's face flushed slightly, she glanced at Ting secretly, and raised her chin higher. Ting smiled faintly and said nothing. He looked at the sand in front of him, without chanting a spell, or even taking out a wand, but just snapped his fingers lightly. The next moment, the sand on the table disappeared without a trace. Oh my God! What did I see? Professor Flitwick exclaimed, a wonderful silent and wandless spell. Professor Flitwick seemed to be about to faint with excitement. Ravenclaw really picked up a treasure this year. He looked at Ting, his eyes full of unprecedented admiration. He had heard before that Ting made a big splash in the Transfiguration class, but he didn't expect him to be so good at spells. It can be said that Ting's outstanding performance and talent far surpassed other little wizards. He couldn't help but think that Ravenclaw had always been suppressed by Slytherin and Gryffindor, and this year finally had hope of a comeback. 5 points for Ravenclaw. Professor Flitwick announced excitedly. At this moment, all the young wizards present stopped their wands. What did they see? A boy of their age had already mastered the skill of casting spells silently and without a wand. This skill is difficult for even many experienced wizards to master. Some young wizards who have just entered the magical world don't understand what's going on, but their classmates will immediately help them. Can you really cast any spell silently and without a wand? Hermione looked at Ting in shock. How can it be so magical? Ting spread his hands. I can only do this for the simplest magic. Of course, he would not tell you the wonderful use of the Eye of God. Even so, it's still very impressive. Hermione exclaimed sincerely, at least, you've walked ahead of me. Boom. The two were whispering to each other when a deafening explosion suddenly sounded in the classroom. Ting reacted quickly, waved his hand, and a transparent shield immediately blocked them, isolating the splashing smoke and shock waves. Hermione looked at Ting in astonishment. Didn't we agree that only the simplest magic can be cast silently and without a wand? Barrier spell is not that simple. Well, as a wizard, it's normal that I just practiced barrier spell. Ting touched his head awkwardly. Hermione bit her lip and swore secretly, if I believe you again, I'll be a fool. The two turned their heads and saw a little wizard from Gryffindor standing there awkwardly, his face covered in black and gray, and the tip of the wand in his hand was blooming. Obviously, he was the initiator of the explosion just now. The sudden explosion was as powerful as a firecracker. Ting recognized the young wizard at a glance. It was Seamus Finnegan who accidentally blew up the fertilizer bucket in the herbology class. He felt that if Seamus focused on wizard duels, he might shine. Imagine that when dueling with him, no matter what spell he recited, it might end up as the effect of the explosion spell. Are you afraid? 1 hour and 20 minutes passed in a flash. At 12 o'clock, the bell for the end of the spell class rang. Through this class, Ting had an intuitive understanding of the level of this class of young wizards. Until the end of the get-out of class, only a few young wizards could reduce the sand on the table, while most of the young wizards' spells were completely ineffective. The afternoon herbology class seemed relaxed and enjoyable. At least none of them would be like Seamus who blew up the fertilizer bucket. Although Lisa's talent in herbology is not as good as her attainments in magic, the knowledge of the first grade is easy to understand after all, and Ting can cope with it with ease with her intelligence. In addition, Ting has strengthened himself after collecting the werewolf, and his physical fitness is much better than that of the generally weak little wizards. Therefore, he successfully impressed Professor Sprout in class. The professor praised him highly and praised him as born to learn herbology. However, Ting felt that this praise was not worth being happy about, and always felt that he was born to be a saint of civil engineering. After a few days of performance, Ting's excellence has been unanimously recognized by Hogwarts teachers and students. Now everyone knows that there are 2 academic masters in this freshman class, Hermione Granger from Gryffindor and Ting from Ravenclaw. These 2 people are simply answering machines in the classroom. No matter what questions the teacher throws out, they can answer fluently, and the classroom tasks are also easy to handle, and the homework is very perfect. With their support, the scores of Gryffindor and Ravenclaw soared like a rocket, and Hufflepuff and Slytherin could only watch them being left behind. However, there are also differences between top students. Hermione is very self-aware of this. On the surface, the two are actually similar, but as the little wizard who spends the most time with Ting, only Hermione knows that this person's genius is not comparable to that of ordinary people. When the two were in the library, Hermione never saw Ting preview or review his homework. He never took more than half an hour to finish his homework. The rest of the time he was either fiddling with a strange typewriter or flipping through those miscellaneous books. On Thursday night, he even missed the library and didn't know where he went to fool around. This kind of free-spirited learning attitude can still have such an outstanding performance, which really amazed her. In the Transfiguration class, he showed his skills in transforming large objects. Needless to say, Ting's various silent and wandless spells were even more desperate. Hermione knew very well that she could perform so well now, because of her hard work and good memory. But facing the existence of Ting, who was so gifted, she still felt deeply frustrated. If she wanted to catch up with Ting, she had to study harder. Episode 35, In-depth study of the principles and functional limits of the Room of Requirement. In fact, Hermione still had some misunderstandings about Ting. In her opinion, Ting only knew how to read miscellaneous books, but she didn't know that Ting's learning progress had long surpassed the stage of following the rules. Lisa's wisdom allowed Ting to get to the core of the learning process and master everything. For him, simply following the textbooks was far from enough. He needed to learn a wide range of magic and broaden his knowledge so that he could learn by analogy and make further progress on the road of magic. By the way, Ting didn't go out to fool around on Thursday night, but went to find the Room of Requirement. The Room of Requirement, also known as the coming and going room, is said to appear and disappear from time to time, and only appears in front of those who really need it. When it appears, it can always arrange the appropriate space according to the needs of the person seeking help. In addition, there is a special house in the Room of Requirement, which stores all the things that have been lost in the castle or hidden by the little wizards since the founding of Hogwarts for thousands of years. At the same time, the Room of Requirement was also cast with a powerful unmappable magic, so that the Room of Requirement itself and the people inside could not appear on any map, even the Marauder's map. If he could find it, Ting would not only have a relatively private room where he could conduct certain research without worrying too much about the inquiring eyes of others. At the same time, the treasure house could also provide Ting with a large number of potential collections. Since he first entered school, Ting had always wanted to do this. It happened that there was no class on Thursday afternoon in the first week of Ravenclaw, so he set out from the dormitory early in the afternoon. After leaving the dormitory, Ting found a corner and let Lynette lie on his shoulder to activate the combat skill, mysterious hidden barrier body skill. In an instant, Ting was led by Lynette into the shadows. At this moment, from the perspective of normal people, their figures could no longer be seen. At the same time, Ting felt that his body was surrounded by wind elements, and the whole person seemed to become as light as a swallow, and his speed of movement was significantly faster. With the help of Lynette, he entered the posture of mysterious body thief. He did this to avoid unnecessary trouble. After all, it was not yet 4 p.m., and the castle was crowded with people. He did not want to run into Filch, ghosts, or other troublemakers. Although it was not yet curfew time, he would have to explain himself if he was seen, which would attract unnecessary attention. In this way, after hiding his body, Ting ran to the 8th floor of the castle in one breath, and patiently searched for more than 10 minutes, and finally found the tapestry depicting the troll beating the stupid Barnabas with a stick. He stood opposite the tapestry and walked back and forth along the wall 3 times. Then, a miracle happened. A shiny door appeared out of thin air on the wall. Ting pulled the door open suddenly, and then quickly closed the door. He looked out through the crack in the door, and he immediately judged that the interior space of this Room of Requirement was obviously not in the same plane as Hogwarts. It just temporarily connected a suitable room to Hogwarts according to the needs of the user. The spatial knowledge here is still very profound for Ting. He can only simply judge that the principle is completely different from the space created by the untraceable extension spell, commonly used by modern wizards. Then, he looked around, and sure enough, the room he wanted appeared in front of him. This place is like an office and a laboratory. The 4 walls are full of bookshelves, which are filled with various books and scrolls. The back of each book is engraved with spells in different languages. There are all kinds of strange bottles and jars on the table, as well as crucibles, stoves, and other complete experimental equipment. It can be said that all of Ting's needs for spell and potion research are met by this room. It really deserves to be the Room of Requirement. Ting exclaimed sincerely. He flipped through the books on the bookshelf and carefully looked at the experimental equipment. It was indeed very complete. Suddenly, an almost crazy idea popped up in his mind. He wanted to test the limits of this Room of Requirement. Perhaps, I should try to see how much this house can satisfy my requirements. Ting already had a plan in mind, so he stood up immediately. I want a strategic missile silo, and an intercontinental strategic missile with a nuclear warhead. He muttered in his heart, no matter which country it is, whether it is Dongfeng, Baiyang, or Minuteman. As soon as the voice fell, the whole house suddenly shook violently. The tables, chairs, books, and equipment in front of him all disappeared, and the whole space was reshaped by an invisible force. The vibration lasted for half a minute before it gradually subsided. However, half a minute later, the vibration subsided, but the expected nuclear silo and nuclear missile did not appear, and the room was empty, as if everything was just Ting's illusion. Ting couldn't help but feel disappointed. Judging from the violent reaction just now, although the room is magical, it also has its limits. Okay, let's change to something simpler. He coughed lightly. Give me a fighter jet, F-14 or Su-27, whatever you like, any one will do. As soon as the voice fell, the room shook again, and it was more violent than before. Ting stumbled and almost fell, but fortunately a pillar appeared in front of him in time, allowing him to hold on to keep his balance. But unfortunately, the response of the room of requirement was limited to this, and there was still no trace of the fighter jet he had been thinking about. Ting frowned. Is it impossible to do even this? He tried to lower the request again. Then, how about giving me a Type 59 main battle tank? The room shook again, and the familiar 5 pairs of wheels did not appear. Or, a mortar will do, I don't mind the old antiques from World War II. He said almost pleadingly. How about an AK? A box gun is also fine. If it doesn't work, give me a bayonet, right? But no matter how he compromised, the room of requirement never gave him the response he expected. He originally thought that the room of requirement was stuck and didn't respond, so he deliberately repeated a bayonet several times, but the result was still disappointing. No matter how violently the room shook, it was still empty. Ting finally couldn't help it and cursed, what a treasure, you can't even make a bayonet? How dare you call it the room of requirement? However, the room didn't respond at all. Only Lynette lazily turned over at Ting's feet and glanced at him, not understanding who the owner was talking to. Ting thought for a moment and had a new guess. Could it be that this room of requirement is only good at making items related to wizards? He was moved and tentatively said, then, give me a set of light armor and a matchlock gun to see. This time, the room of requirement responded quickly. A European matchlock gun appeared in front of him out of thin air, but the light armor was still nowhere to be seen. Okay, then how about a full set of plate armor for me? He continued to test. Then, a bright full-body armor appeared, and its shape was almost the same as those walking armors in Hogwarts. Next, Ting's interest was completely ignited, and he couldn't wait to ask the room of requirement to produce 3 more books, The Theory of Relativity, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. At the same time, he also asked for 2 flying brooms, a sweeping 7 stars, and a Nimbus 2000. In the blink of an eye, The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them and Sweeping 7 Stars all appeared in front of him. However, The Theory of Relativity and Nimbus 2000 did not appear. Ting threw the book and flying broom aside, frowned slightly, and fell into deep thought. Episode 36, Treasure Hunt. Ting had previously speculated that the room of requirement might not be able to create items that were too advanced. However, the experiment just now overturned his idea. Just think about it, compared to the light armor, the matchlock gun must be more advanced, but now, he does have a matchlock gun from the Renaissance in front of him, but the light armor has not yet appeared. Obviously, the law of the creation of the room of requirement has nothing to do with the age or technological content of the items. Then he guessed that the room of requirement could not create items from the Muggle world? But the appearance of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes overturned this speculation. This novel was written by Muggles, published by Muggle Publishing House, and is a best-selling novel in the Muggle world. It can be said that it is a pure Muggle item that cannot be purer. After eliminating so many irrelevant options, Ting finally came to a conclusion. After this series of tests, Ting came to a conclusion. The magic of the room of requirement is limited to reproducing those things that have appeared in Hogwarts Castle. This inference is actually not difficult to understand. Although the room of requirement, as a part of Hogwarts, contains a certain spirituality, it is not a living being after all, and cannot travel around and gain knowledge like humans. Therefore, it naturally cannot create things that it has never seen with its own eyes. In other words, the knowledge of the room of requirement depends entirely on what the students of Hogwarts have brought in. This also reasonably explains why it can create European plate armor, but knows nothing about the Eastern Ming armor. Similarly, it is not surprising that students bring a best-selling The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes into school, but they are unlikely to bring advanced academic papers from the Muggle world, such as The Theory of Relativity, into Hogwarts. It is not difficult to understand why the old model of the 7-star flying broom can be found here, but the latest Nimbus 2000 cannot be found. However, Ting estimates that by the end of this semester, the Nimbus 2000 should also appear in the inventory of the room of requirement. After roughly exploring the scope of the room of requirement, Ting finally began the real purpose of his trip, treasure hunting. He closed his eyes and said to himself, I want a place to hide things. The next moment, the world was spinning. When Ting opened his eyes again, he was surprised to find that he was in a magnificent hall. The room was as spacious as a cathedral. A few beams of soft light came through the towering windows. Between the beams of light, a city made up of various objects came into view. Ting could see that these were all objects hidden by generations of Hogwarts students. On both sides of the streets, the hills of shabby furniture were crumbling, as if they would collapse at any time. These furniture may be evidence hidden by students to cover up their magic mistakes, or they may be waste secretly hidden by house elves to maintain the cleanliness and decency of the castle. Thousands of books were scattered all over the ground, including banned secrets, graffitied classics, and even stolen orphans. Winged slingshots and wolf-tooth flying saucers hovered feebly in the air, and spoiled potions were still flowing in some shabby bottles. In addition, there were various hats, jewelry, cloaks, and something that looked like a dragon eggshell. Several tightly plugged bottles flashed with strange lights, while several rusty spears and a blood-stained axe lay quietly in the corner. This was the waste dump in the room of requirement. These abandoned items had been lying here quietly for centuries, with no one paying attention to them. I think no one would touch them in 100 years. However, for Ting, they were priceless treasures. Although the previous treasure hunting trip in Diagon Alley failed, Ting also figured out some rules of the Great Collector system. To obtain advanced rewards, the collection must consider two directions: the preciousness of the item and the special meaning behind it. The first point is simple. The rarer and more precious the item is, the richer the reward will be after collecting it. Just like the opal necklace, its rewards are far better than other miscellaneous magic amulets. The special meaning is a bit complicated, and it may come from many aspects. For example, if an item once belonged to a great wizard, then it carries the extraordinary significance of the great man, or the first wand or broomstick of a young wizard. These also contain important growth marks. Furthermore, even if it is a prop used by a minor character in the original plot, as long as it occupies a place in the story, it also has special significance. The storage room in front of him stores all the lost or hidden items of Hogwarts over the past 1,000 years. It can be said that there are many antiques with a long history. Considering that a large number of great wizards in the UK and even the European continent have come from Hogwarts over the past 1,000 years, it is possible to find a lot of their relics here. In the following time, Ting began his treasure hunt. He picked up a wolf-tooth flying saucer and threw it lightly. The flying saucer flew out with a beep and hit a pile of forbidden objects. In an instant, the pile of forbidden objects collapsed like a landslide, stirring up a cloud of dust. Lynette curiously approached a rusty sword and tried to step on it to play. However, the seemingly solid sword broke under her feet and almost hit her feet. Lynette jumped away in fear, but soon her attention was attracted by a winged slingshot. She jumped happily on the pile of debris and played catching butterflies. The man and the cat touched here and there, trying the debris here and there, picking out the things that looked valuable. Unfortunately, almost everything here was garbage that was not worth collecting in the eyes of the system. He got an unexpected harvest from a pile of broken flying brooms. When he chose to collect a broom that was almost broken, the system finally responded. Congratulations to the host for collecting the flying broom sweeping 1 star, and rewarded initial wings. For a long time, wizards' flying brooms were made by individual wizards until 1926, when the three brothers Bob, Bill, and Barnaby Ollerton changed all this. The Sweep Broom Company they founded ushered in a new era for racing brooms. And their first product, the Sweep 1 Star, was the first generation of this revolution. This broom was mass-produced for the first time and quickly became popular throughout the magic world. As the earliest racing broom and a pioneer of mass production, the Sweep 1 Star undoubtedly has a very high collection value. As for the initial wings, it is actually the wind wings that Amber gave to the traveler. This is a very sophisticated alchemical device. It is very small when folded and can be hidden under the cloak. After unfolding, the wind wings function as a glider, but it is much more convenient and maneuverable than a glider. For Ting, although this is not a treasure, it can at least give him an extra layer of safety when riding a flying broom. Unfortunately, the other flying brooms also look very old, but perhaps because they are too badly damaged, they are all regarded as garbage by the system. However, the feedback they gave after being swallowed by the system was quite good, such as comfortable cushion, swift balance foot pedal, chance acceleration vitality broomstick, etc. All of them are broom accessories, and there are also affixes. Isn't this encouraging him to modify the broom? Take them all, and then modify the Nimbus 2000 and the 1-star Sweep broom. In addition, the winged slingshot that Lynette pounced on also triggered the collection conditions, bringing Ting a 3-star weapon, slingshot. In the world of Teyvat, this bow can be regarded as a high-quality alchemical weapon, but in Ting's hands, it is purely useless. Bows and arrows are not as useful as magic. However, Ting still happily accepted the reward. He hid the wings of wind under his cloak, put away the slingshot, and continued to walk forward. Episode 37, Teleportation Anchor Blueprint, Ding. Congratulations to the host for collecting Celestina Warbeck's banjo, and reward is the tune of the Big Dream, ding. Congratulations to the host for collecting the 5-legged monster skeleton, and reward is the dust-proof potion formula, ding. Congratulations to the host for collecting the house elf's menu, and reward is the full menu of the Wanman Hall. In this collection room, Ting buried his head in searching for 5 or 6 hours, and he didn't even have time to eat dinner. Although he had a lot of harvest, most of them were miscellaneous things. After being collected, they were swallowed by the system, and in the end, they could only return some materials, such as stone amber, floating crystal core, and nectar. And the few valuable collections were all rewarded with alchemical formulas, recipes, and even music scores. For Ting, these things are not very helpful, but at least they are better than nothing. In short, as the search deepened, Ting's face became more and more ugly. Until he picked up a small box filled with glittering silver powder. Ding! Congratulations to the host for collecting Flu powder for the first time, and you will be rewarded with a teleportation anchor manufacturing blueprint. Seeing this, Ting was shocked. Is this anchor the kind of teleportation anchor on the continent of Teyvat? He couldn't wait to open the blueprint and quickly confirmed its authenticity. The blueprint not only detailed the method of making a real anchor, but also included a simplified version of the temporary anchor manufacturing blueprint. This is a good thing, Ting said excitedly. With this gain, he felt that all his efforts tonight were worth it. The function of the anchor is exactly the same as in the game. As long as an anchor is installed at home, he can cast a spell to teleport home at any time, no matter where he is. This is much more convenient than the traditional way of travel in the wizarding world, Flu powder and port key. If you want to use Flu powder, you can only start from a fireplace connected to the Flu network and go to another fireplace connected to the Flu network. As for the port key, you have to touch it to teleport to the corresponding place. It's not like a teleportation anchor, which can be used anytime and anywhere. The best part is that using the teleportation anchor point to transfer can break through Hogwarts' blockade of apparition. As long as Ting can place an anchor point outside the school and one inside the school, wouldn't he be able to sneak out of the school at any time? Unfortunately, he got the blueprint too late. As a daily necessity for every family in the magic world, Flu powder is not a difficult magic item to get. If he had bought some in Diagon Alley, he would probably have an anchor point at home now. Looking at the time, curfew will be in half an hour. Ting left the room of requirement, with Lynette in his arms, with regret. On Friday morning, the first-year students of Gryffindor and Slytherin finally had their first potions class. Professor Snape did not show any mercy to these freshmen. He taught them a good lesson and let them feel the cruelty of the adult world in advance. At lunchtime, Harry's experience spread throughout Hogwarts. Snape seemed to be especially concerned about him, asking questions one after another. Harry was slightly careless when answering, and he didn't have time to look at Snape, so he was considered to be sleeping in class, and Gryffindor was deducted 5 points. When Harry looked at Snape, he was accused of glaring at the professor with bad intentions, and another 5 points were deducted, so Harry carefully maintained eye contact with Snape, but didn't dare to look at him directly, which was also accused of disrespecting teachers, and another 5 points were deducted. To make matters worse, Harry accidentally broke the glass bottle containing the potion, and now he was deducted another 5 points for damaging public property. However, just 1 minute later, Malfoy followed Harry's footsteps, but was given 5 more points. This reason is also weird, because Malfoy assisted Professor Snape to destroy the defective experimental equipment, thus preventing a potential teaching accident. However, the same thing from Hermione's mouth has become a different taste. It was me, I was the first, it was obviously me, whether it was raising my hand or answering a question. Why did Professor Snape only let Harry answer and ignored me? Hermione complained to Ting angrily at the dinner table. He only let Harry answer, this is simply blatant favoritism. Due to the appearance of Ting, Hermione was hanging out with him and Susan all day long. The person she was most familiar with in Gryffindor was Neville, but she had an average relationship with Harry. So she didn't realize there was anything fishy about it. After hearing this, Ting rolled his eyes helplessly. Harry might not agree with her conclusion. Professor Snape is like this. You'd better not be so active in his class. But if I don't answer the questions, how can I give Gryffindor extra points? Hermione muttered. You've already added a lot of points, haven't you? Ting actually wanted to say that if she didn't get deducted points in Snape's class, she should be happy, and she still wanted to get extra points. In short, except for Hermione, other freshmen finally understood what kind of terrible man Snape was. Hearing this news, countless young eagles trembled with fear, and Ting's roommates were even more frightened, and some even dared not go to class. Their worries were not unreasonable. You know, Ting confronted Professor Snape on the first day of school. If Professor Flitwick hadn't arrived in time, who knows what would happen next? Now that Snape is taking care of Harry Potter so much, wouldn't Ting be unable to escape? They were Ting's roommates. Snape targeted Ting, so wouldn't they also become potential targets? This set of rhetoric was well-reasoned and convincing. In short, when Ting left the dormitory to go to class, they were still lingering in the dormitory. In the afternoon, it was Ravenclaw and Rawhipatch's turn to have the potion class, and the classroom was in a basement. This place was indeed the old bat's territory, and the decoration style of the whole room was filled with a gloomy atmosphere. There were large and small glass jars hanging on the walls, with all kinds of strange animal specimens soaked in them. The air was filled with the smell of formalin, making people feel like they were in a morgue. And those human skeleton models hanging on the wall were even more creepy. Their empty eye sockets were particularly terrifying. Whenever a little wizard approached, these skeletons would suddenly make a strange hee-hee laugh, which made people shudder. In a corner of the classroom, there was a mummy, wrapped tightly in cloth strips, revealing only a shrunken face. The inscription on the body actually had the 3 characters "daily necessities" written on it. "Professor, what's the matter with that mummy?" Padma raised her hand tremblingly before class to ask. Professor Snape didn't get angry this time, but was surprisingly patient, explaining, "This was a professor of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class a few years ago. He borrowed my territory to make potions, but his craftsmanship was not good and he ruined the potion. After he drank the bottle of failed work, he turned into this mummy." "Potions, are they really that scary?" Hannah asked with lingering fear. "No, it's not that dangerous." Snape dragged out the sound and laughed sarcastically, "as long as you are not the idiots I often meet. For smart people, brewing potions is still quite safe." After saying this, many students were secretly worried in their hearts. They were still very self-aware of their IQ. Of course, Snape continued to grin, revealing a strange smile. "I promise that even if you are stupid, you will not become a mummy. But whether you will lie in the school hospital is not up to me. It all depends on how much smarter you are than the troll." As soon as he said this, the whole classroom fell into silence. Snape squinted his eyes and looked around, then picked up the roster and started to call the roll. When he read the name Ting, his voice was deliberately dragged out, and he glanced at Ting coldly. After the first night of school, he remembered this name. In the following days, he heard this name again, and many professors praised him for his intelligence. And he, Severus Snape, hated this kind of little wizard who wanted to show off the most. Just then, the wooden door was pushed open with a bang. Ting's roommates Michael, Anthony, and others appeared at the door panting, and it was obvious that they were late. Michael stammered to explain, Sorry, Professor, we are lost." Snape interrupted him coldly, "I thought that creatures with higher IQs than trolls could at least find their own classrooms. It seems that I overestimated you Ravenclaw students. Perhaps I should suggest to the headmaster to raise the admission standards." There was silence all around, no one dared to speak, only the crackling sound of burning torches echoed in the air. Michael and the other 2 stood there awkwardly, neither leaving nor staying. This stupid look made Snape even angrier. "Why are you standing there like an idiot? Hurry up and find a seat. Don't stand there like an idiot, you are lowering the class of the whole classroom." Amidst the whispers, Snape suddenly turned his eyes to Ting. "Mr. Yi, why don't you help your roommates find the way? Does their lateness show your excellence? Because of you, Ravenclaw will lose 1 point." Ting and Susan exchanged glances, both of them were very helpless. Episode 38, Snape's Targeting. As soon as the class started, Snape showed strong aggressiveness. He waved his robe and strode back to the podium, his voice hoarse and low. "You are here to learn potion preparation, this ancient, precise, and rigorous craft. I ask you to concentrate on every class and don't let me down." As soon as the voice fell, Lisa Dupin asked curiously, "Professor, what is potion?" Snape's mouth curled up a weird smile and said slowly, "It is the secret language of broken internal organs, the chant of coagulated blood, the dance of entangled tentacles, the groan of twisted plants, the elegy of shriveled limbs, the cry of broken brains, and the temptation of scarlet fruits. It interprets the ups and downs of life in the interweaving of red and white, and returns to the silent eternity in the fusion of yellow and brown. This is an extremely gorgeous and intoxicating art." Listening to this dreamlike description, Ting unconsciously licked his lips with the tip of his tongue. Somehow, the aroma of spicy hot pot appeared in his mind, and his stomach started to growl. Snape had just finished his opening remarks when he turned his eyes to Ting. "Mr. Yi." He suddenly challenged, "Tell me, what potion will be made by boiling scurvy, lovage, and sneezeweed together?" "Confusion potion." Even though he was suddenly attacked, Ting still stood up calmly and answered calmly, "This medicine will make people impulsive and reckless." This answer is perfect. If it were another professor, Ravenclaw College might have added 5 points for this. Unfortunately, Severus Snape's cold face still had no expression, as if this answer was not worth mentioning to him. "Okay, let me ask you again." He continued to press, "What is the use of salamander blood in potions? How do we usually use it? It is a precious ingredient used to enhance the effect of potions." Ting blurted out, "Salamander blood can greatly enhance the effects of other potions, and is an indispensable catalyst in potions." Snape nodded slightly, but there was still not much approval on his face. "If I need you to find white fresh water, where would you go to find it?" "White fresh water is mainly produced in China, the United States, and Mexico." Ting answered without thinking, "So, I might buy a ticket to East Asia or North America first." Isn't this the same as someone asking you where you can collect mulberries, and you say you can buy them in the supermarket? As soon as he said this, several little Ravenclaw wizards couldn't help laughing. But Snape glanced over and they immediately shut up. Ting shrugged and added, "Of course, if you have to look for it nearby, dictamni generally grows on hills, flat bushes, or under grasslands and sparse woods." Reading from the book. Snape snorted and finally made such an evaluation. Whether Ting is reading from the book or has real knowledge, Professor Snape must abide by the rules of Hogwarts. Answering questions correctly will get extra points. Snape still has this integrity. Of course, this is also related to Ting being a Ravenclaw student. If it were Harry. 1 point for Ravenclaw. Snape said reluctantly, and the tone was like cutting his flesh. The eyes of the surrounding Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students looking at Ting changed, with surprise and respect, as if they were looking at a great god. These questions and answers were beyond their knowledge. If they were called by Snape, they would be lucky not to be scolded. It is unthinkable that Ting could make Snape speechless. But Ting could do it easily, which is really admirable. However, Ting and the little wizards were not happy for too long, and Snape added slowly, "Don't forget to add Professor when answering questions in the future. Mr. Yi, you are disrespectful to the teacher, and you will be deducted 2 points." Ting shrugged helplessly and sat down. "Why don't you write down all these key points?" Snape's voice suddenly rose, "Do you think you have already learned it? You are the worst class I have ever taught." The sound of notes rustled in the classroom immediately, and the students buried their heads in memorizing, fearing that they would miss a word. Then, Snape walked to the podium and said in a low voice, "Today, I will teach you how to mix a potion that can treat scabies. I really can't think of a simpler potion than this. If any of you still fail, I really want to suggest that the headmaster think carefully about whether he has invited some trolls in." These words made everyone hold their breath and K up their ears, fearing that they would miss some details that would cause the potion to fail and be identified as a troll. Snape waved his wand lightly, and a large number of fonts immediately appeared on the blackboard, recording in detail the steps of making the potion. "Oh, by the way," he deliberately dragged out the tone, with a hint of sarcasm on his face, "the book, Magic Potions and Liquids in your hand." He deliberately paused for a moment before continuing. "It was written by the famous wizard Arsene Jigger and is also the textbook designated by the Ministry of Magic. But I have to say that some of the content in that book, although I don't want to offend, is indeed outdated 50 years ago. So," he raised his voice, "if my experimental steps are different from what is written in the book, don't make a fuss. Just do what I say." A Hufflepuff badger muttered, "Then what's the point of buying these textbooks?" Ting recognized his name as Wayne Hopkins. Professor Snape turned his sharp eyes to Wayne, and he was not angry. Instead, he calmly explained, "The knowledge in the textbook is accurate, but the science of potions is constantly improving. Many operating steps have been updated, and we must keep up with the times." When it comes to potions, Snape's temperament instantly changed. He walked to the podium and emphasized seriously, "I repeat again, potions is not only a precise science, but also a rigorous craft. Here, there is no so-called textbook, only reference books." He paused and continued, "Don't think that potions are some kind of unchanging antique. Except for those who have been changed over time, the principles of the test and the brewing methods are changing with each passing day. I won't teach you a lot of theories in class. You have to work hard to learn the basics after class. My task," he pointed to the blackboard next to him filled with various materials, "is to guide you in practice and teach you the best brewing techniques I think." The white chalk handwriting on the blackboard is clearly visible: dry nettles, venomous snake teeth, horned slugs, porcupine quills. The materials and steps to be used are written on this blackboard, and everything you need is in the storage cabinet." As soon as Snape finished speaking, the door of the storage cabinet bounced open with a bang as if it had heard a call. He reminded again, "Be careful when brewing potions. If you make a mistake, these potions will not only fail to cure the disease, but will make you full of boils." At this point, Snape's thin lips curled up into a weird smile, "So, be sure to follow the steps strictly. I don't want to see you in the hospital this weekend." "Okay, don't just stand there, 2 people in a group, hurry up and do it." Episode 39, Electromagnetic Heating Graphite Crucible. Snape gave the order, and the whole classroom immediately became busy. Students rushed to the storage cabinet to get the materials, and then started to cook soup in pairs. Ting and Susan were in the same group. Susan was very talented in transfiguration, but she seemed a little flustered in the potion class. After a burst of smoke and fire, she accidentally turned into a big clown face, and her efforts only exchanged for a crucible of green waste. This potion is much more difficult than transfiguration. Susan stared at the green liquid in the crucible with a bitter face, and her eyebrows were twisted into a Chuan character. As for Ting, he started to study potions in depth during the holidays. With Lisa's talent in this area, a mere scabies potion would not be difficult for him. However, it seems that because he lost face by not failing Ting just now, Snape targeted him again. "Mr. Yi, why do you use this non-standard crucible? Are you trying to attract attention?" When Ting's potion was halfway through, Snape came up and mocked him as if he had caught something. Ting's equipment is indeed different, a black crucible of unknown material, beakers and flasks not made of crystal but engraved with precise scales, and a scale with scales written on it. These equipment are very different from the retro equipment of other little wizards present. Facing Snape's provocation, Ting stood up and met those cold eyes fearlessly. "Professor Snape, I think we need to discuss the use of these experimental instruments of mine." The other party was obviously looking for trouble, but Ting did not intend to indulge him. With Lisa's talent as a backing, he had enough confidence to deal with Snape's challenge. "All my experimental equipment is different, because they are all Muggle products." He picked up a beaker and said seriously, "I personally think that Muggle products have gone further than us in this standardized device that does not require alchemical enchantment." He gently shook the beaker in his hand and continued, "As you said, potion science is a discipline that requires precision and rigor, and in this regard, Muggles do much better than wizards. Each one is marked with precise scales, which is much better than our crystal bottles of different sizes and no measurement. Muggle test tubes and beakers, each one is made exactly the same, accurate to milliliters, which can greatly improve the accuracy of preparing potions." As he said, he pointed to the balance next to him. "Look at this, we wizards are still using that old-fashioned brass balance, which is good enough if it can reach 1 gram. But what about the pan balance used by Muggles in experiments? The accuracy can reach 0.1 grams. Just in terms of weighing medicinal materials, I am already 10 times more accurate than others. If I change to a more advanced mechanical analytical balance, the accuracy can reach 1 milligram, which is a direct increase of 100 times. Finally, let's talk about the crucible issue that you are most concerned about." Ting paused for a moment, giving Snape some time to digest his previous words, and then continued to talk. "The pewter crucibles that freshmen are required to use, to be honest, have a low melting point and are not corrosion resistant. They are cheap and have no other advantages. Even Muggles have eliminated this kind of thing. The problem of low melting point can be solved by lowering the temperature and sacrificing the boiling speed, but poor corrosion resistance is a big problem. This is why you have always emphasized that the last medicinal material, porcupine quills, must be added after the crucible is off the fire. Because porcupine quills and the medicinal liquid being boiled are both acidic, once dissolved, they will mix into a highly corrosive mixed acid. This mixed acid reacts actively at high temperatures and can easily melt through the bottom of the pewter crucible." Crash! As soon as he finished speaking, a deafening roar suddenly sounded, and the whole classroom was shaking. Ting reacted quickly, grabbed Susan's arm, pulled her behind him, and hid beside the crucible. The girl only felt her wrist being tightly grasped, and then her chest sank. The 2 water balls were pressed into round cakes, and the whole person was pressed to the ground by Ting. She was originally panicking, but at this moment she felt an inexplicable sense of security in her heart. After a while, the 2 stood up. It turned out that Justin and Ernie's crucible next door had exploded violently, the potion in the pot splashed everywhere, and the ground and walls were instantly burned with burnt holes. The classroom was filled with a pungent smell, which was disgusting. Justin's left half of the body was splashed with magic potion, and half of his face quickly broke out with dense scabies, which looked painful. Ernie suffered on the right half, and the 2 of them were a perfect match, one on the left and one on the right. It seems that there are unlucky people who failed for convenience. Ting watched the scene with gloating. A bunch of idiots. Snape came over with a gloomy face, waved his wand, and the potion spilled on the ground was cleaned up instantly. At this moment, Snape was almost furious. He watched the precious potion flow into his storage cabinet, and his beloved treasure collection was emitting white smoke. Snape was so distressed that he almost bled. These precious medicinal materials were his favorites. Professor Snape, although the accident just now was caused by Finch Fletchley and Macmillan's improper operation, the real reason was actually the material limitations of the pewter crucible itself. Ting took the opportunity to interrupt. As he spoke, he opened the lid of his crucible and threw all the porcupine quills that had been processed long ago into it. But my graphite crucible is different. Ting smiled proudly. This crucible is a masterpiece of modern Muggle materials science. It is made of natural flake graphite. The price is about the same as that of a pewter crucible, but its performance is far superior to that of a pewter crucible. This graphite crucible is not only extremely corrosion resistant and can withstand temperatures of more than 3000 degrees, but its thermal conductivity is far superior to that of a metal pewter crucible. When using it to brew potions, the step of leaving the fire in the middle can be completely omitted without worrying about any danger. In fact, Ting didn't say one more thing, that is, the graphite crucible also has special conductivity. This crucible does not require traditional flame heating, but can be heated by electromagnetic induction like an induction cooker. Compared with traditional flame heating, electromagnetic induction heating is not only more uniform, but also faster. Most importantly, it is more convenient for Ting. He only needs to use fingertip thunderstorm to easily complete the heating process of the crucible. It can be said that the graphite crucible is perfectly suited for the Rose Witch and can be regarded as Lisa's selected product. Snape looked down at the black crucible in front of him and found that everything was just as Ting said. The light green liquid was boiling fiercely in the graphite crucible, but the inner wall of the crucible was still as new, without any change. Moreover, since the heating was never interrupted during the brewing process, the temperature of this potion was almost just right. At this moment, in Ting's crucible, the light blue potion was taking shape at an astonishing speed. The entire brewing process took less than a quarter of the theoretical time taken by other little wizards. When the materials in the crucible were finally boiled into an amber transparent liquid, Snape finally nodded slightly. He knew that Ting's potion had been successfully brewed, and its completion even surpassed many professional potion masters. This shows that his new experimental equipment is feasible. Episode 40, The Twins' Request. Those two idiots just now. Snape turned around and shouted coldly, "You should be glad that Mr. Yi successfully brewed the potion. Give that idiot the potion brewed by Ting," he continued to order. "With his injuries, there is no need to go to the school infirmary." Hearing Snape's order, Justin and Ernie's two roommates immediately came forward. After obtaining Ting's consent, they carefully took some potion with a glass bottle. The effect was immediate. Almost as soon as the two drank the bottle of boil potion, the redness and swelling on their bodies gradually subsided. Due to Mr. Ye's wonderful performance, Ravenclaw will be awarded 5 points. Snape announced the reward for Ting gloomily, and then hurried away. Next, Snape seemed to vent all the anger he had suffered from Ting on other young wizards. He paced slowly between the tables, pointing and commenting on the work of each student, mercilessly. Several potions had already been scrapped under such low pressure. When his eyes fell on the pot of strange blue mixture of Lisa Dupin and Mandy Blow, a sarcastic smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. "Do you two think this pot of potion is drinkable? Do you want to try a new taste?" Then, he turned to Oliver and Roger's work and commented coldly, "If you drink this pot of potion, let alone cure hemorrhoids, I'm afraid it will make people grow more hemorrhoids." Almost every student's work was found out by Snape, and then he suffered a lot of sarcasm. Until he walked to the first row, his eyes were fixed on the pot of crystal clear light yellow liquid in front of Susan. His brows were slightly wrinkled, as if he wanted to find flaws in this perfect work, but couldn't find any. "Not bad," he admitted reluctantly. "Miss Bones, for your sake, I'll give Hufflepuff 2 points. "Great!" Susan cheered softly and gave Ting a hug with a ball. "Thanks to your guidance. That's the result of your willingness to learn." Ting remained calm on the surface, but he was a little happy in his heart. It's better to have more of this kind of benefits. The potion class was finally over. But the news that Snape was speechless in the classroom by the little wizard spread rapidly in Hogwarts like the golden snidget. By dinner time, almost everyone knew about it. Walking in the corridors of the campus, you can hear the excited discussions of students everywhere. "Have you heard, Song Xian? I mean about Snape? What did you hear?" Professor Snape was speechless by a Ravenclaw student during class. Did you know? What? Professor Snape was scolded by a Ravenclaw wizard today, and he didn't dare to say a word back. Have you heard? I heard. Professor Snape was scolded into autism. The Ravenclaw wizard scolded Snape into autism, and the news spread rapidly in Hogwarts like wildfire. As the core figure of this storm, Ting naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. He is known as Professor Snape's biggest nemesis. On the first day of school, Ting almost fell into the hands of Professor Snape. Many people were secretly watching the show, waiting for him to fall. But who would have thought that not only did he not fall, but he made Professor Snape suffer a setback. He is really the most ruthless person in Hogwarts. That night, he received special treatment after entering the hall. From the door to the Ravenclaw table, he seemed to walk on a star-studded avenue. The classmates stood up and rushed to shake hands with him. That posture was like welcoming a triumphant hero. When he walked past the Gryffindor table, Lee Jordan's eyes lit up and pulled him to his side. The Weasley twins also came over. They enthusiastically stuffed a glass of pumpkin juice into Ting's mouth and raised their glasses to shout, "Cheers to the hero of Hogwarts, Ting." He taught Professor Snape, the head of the three evils of Hogwarts, a lesson. The twins' cheers came one after another, attracting the attention of the surrounding little wizards. People who didn't know thought they had broken into the lair of the Death Eaters. At the Gryffindor table, every face was filled with a long-lost smile. Over the years, they have been bullied by Professor Snape. 7 years, do you know how they have been through these 7 years? Watching Slytherin step on their heads and win the House Cup for 7 consecutive years, it was all because of Snape's unconditional favoritism. Ting was fed several sips of pumpkin juice by everyone, and it took a lot of effort to recover. He smiled bitterly and said, "These are all rumors you spread, right?" George patted Ting on the shoulder and laughed, "Oh, brother, don't worry about those rumors. The important thing is that everyone is happy now." Fred also said, "That's right, finally someone can dampen the old bat's arrogance. This is a good thing that makes people happy." Then, the two said a few good words to Ting, which made him feel a little wrong. In the original book, the twins were not of this character. He was secretly alert, wondering if they were going to play a prank on him. But soon, the other party revealed his purpose. That. Ting, I heard that you used some Muggle-made potion equipment in the potion class. George hesitated. It's about the same price as the crucible we use, but the performance is much better, and it can also reduce the time of boiling potion. That's true. Ting nodded, but it's called a graphite crucible. Not only is the thermal conductivity stronger than the pewter crucible, but it can also withstand higher temperatures. In other words, the potion that could only be simmered over a low fire can be boiled over a high fire with a graphite crucible, and the time can be compressed several times. Yes, that's it. Fred looked at him expectantly. Can you lend it to us? Well, I need to think about it. Ting thought for a while and asked, "What do you need this for?" He frowned. As far as I know, all the potions taught by Snape can be made with pewter crucibles, so there is no need to change to graphite crucibles. This is because... Fred glanced at George. The twins nodded at the same time. This is because we need to do some research in private. Fred said, "You may have heard that the two of us often play pranks in Hogwarts. Recently, we have become interested in prank products." George continued, "You should know Zonko's joke shop." Of course, Ting nodded. "I heard that it is a small shop selling toys and prank props. The Muggle world actually has similar prank props. I'm glad you understand." At this point, Fred lowered his voice. "We now want to study how these joke props are made. Imagine if we can make these props ourselves, hee. George's eyes flashed with longing. Maybe we can even sell them to other classmates. Fred also looked forward to it. Yes, maybe we can develop our own joke props in the future. Ting knew that their dream came true in the end. In the original book, they did open a joke shop of their own, and it was much more popular than Zonko's joke shop.